You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. We're going to turn to the front page. On Front Page, I sit down with another journalist to talk about the biggest news developing right now and how it affects the Pacific Northwest. And today I am so excited to welcome back to the KUOW airwaves a very familiar voice to KUOW listeners, Austin Jenkins. He was a longtime reporter for NPR stations around here for Olympia coverage, and now national reporter covering tech policy in the States for Pluribus News, which is part of State of Affairs. Austin, we've missed you, man. Welcome back to KUOW.
It's great to be back, Libby. Nice to talk with you. It used to be I worked in the basement of the Capitol. Now I'm working at home, and I got to warn you, dog is my co-pilot. So if she's sleeping next to me, hopefully she behaves while we chat. But if she barks, that's what's going on.
I actually want to know her opinion about all of these stories, so I'm expecting some
She's a,
participation.
she's
Well,
very thoughtful.
what's your dog's name?
Ginger.
Ginger, you are welcome anytime. Let's get to our top story on Front Page.
If we need to. I mean, the intent is to follow the Constitution, and there's a referendum allowed, and so we're challenging that. And if they say no, then yeah, we'll take it to the Supreme Court.
Okay, that's Brian Haywood, the founder and funder behind Let's Go Washington. That's the group that's gearing up for a big fight over Washington's new income tax on millionaires. Haywood was on the radio station Seattle Red earlier this week. Governor Ferguson signed the tax into law on Monday. It will collect 9.9% of every dollar of income over $1 million starting in 2028. So for the folks, about estimated 20 to 22,000 around the state households who would be affected by this, this would affect your 2029 tax filings. And Austin, the ink was barely dry on that bill when we heard about plans to challenge the tax on the ballot and in the court. In fact, yesterday, Brian Haywood's group filed a referendum to try to stop the millionaire's tax from going into effect. But the Secretary of State's office says not so fast. It's not going to process that referendum because Democrats included anti-referendum language in the bill. So this stuff gets really complicated. I'm wondering if first we can take the referendum issue and how this is going to show up the fight at the ballot box. And then we're going to kind of turn to more of the court challenge over the constitutionality of an income tax later, if that works for you.
Yeah, it does. I think, we may see the court challenge, or likely we'll see the court challenge before we see the ballot challenge. But this lack of an opportunity to do a referendum, which is a lower bar, certainly raises the bar to get this on the ballot, let voters have a say. But it doesn't foreclose an initiative. And I think that, it's pretty clear that there are activists with deep pockets like Brian Haywood who will very likely seek to get this on the ballot. And I think that that's been the expectation all along, even from supporters of this tax, that it's going to be challenged both at the ballot box and in the courts. Maybe the legislature made it harder for the ballot box challenge, but it's still going to happen.
This language that was included, it's called a necessity clause, and it's something that the legislature can put in if it meets a certain threshold. And, the law is something that I think Brian Haywood is going to be trying to knock down. The threshold has to do with whether or not there's an emergency need and whether or not this is related to the, being necessary for government operations. Haywood is basically saying that the legislature is trying to only use one of those metrics and, go ahead and forestall the use of referendum here. And he wants to take that to the state Supreme Court. Now, that would be a different challenge than the constitutionality of the bill itself. I mean, what do you think about the use of necessity clause here for the state legislature? Like, are they using that too liberally, as Haywood would charge?
It's certainly not uncommon to slap an emergency clause on on a bill and say it's necessary, it's emergent, and therefore foreclose the referendum opportunity. I've seen it before. It's not uncommon. This presents, as you note, an interesting situation, though, where we may in fact see a court challenge to how this is being applied, and that may be the precursor to the bigger challenge, which is whether this is constitutional. So, yeah, maybe this is a moment when some harder questions are going to be asked about how that is used and whether it's being used appropriately. in the long run, it's not the key question at stake here, which is, again, is this constitutional, and are voters going to uphold it? Which are two really big questions. What I've been saying about this is that an income tax has been, as long as I've covered Olympia, the third rail of Washington politics. It's also been the holy grail for the progressive left. And the conventional wisdom was always that you would not tackle a big new tax in an election year. And you save that for an off year. So the fact that they did it this year, that they got it through, got it passed at the governor's support, and are now setting up these court challenges and these ballot challenges, I just think we need to step back and sort of take in the significance of that historically, politically, and otherwise. It shows you that Democrats really think they have history, the people, and the courts on their side. But there are a lot of steps that need to yet happen before this takes effect in 2028 and starts being collected in 2029.
From what I can tell, it seems like Haywood is telling other media outlets. We have invited him to come on. We're hoping to interview Brian again about this. But when he's been speaking to other outlets, including the Center Square, he's basically saying he thinks that this ballot challenge, if it ends up being an initiative or a referendum, it's probably not going to end up on the ballot this fall. He thinks that the court challenge is probably going to go forward sooner. And, that court challenge is the question over the 1933, ruling, the Culleton ruling, which said that income is property in our state. And since the state constitution is saying property has to be uniformly taxed, we cannot have a graduated income tax in Washington. Now, as you say, Democrats like Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson are counting on basically a new makeup of a Supreme Court. By the way, a bunch of Supreme Court state seats up for election this fall to basically overturn Culleton. Right, Austin? Like, that would be a pretty landmark situation if that happens.
Right. Nearly 100 years of case law being overturned. But you're right that this is going to be a court that is not the same court that upheld the capital gains tax. And in terms of the order of operations, in many ways, it makes sense for opponents to wait and see what happens in the courts for a couple of reasons. One, it's costly to do a ballot measure, an initiative, to get the signatures and get that on the ballot. Not that a court challenge is free, but if this is thrown out by the court, then you don't need to do the ballot measure. Also, there's an argument for not going to the ballot if you are an opponent of this tax this year, because it's the midterm elections. Republicans are in control of Congress and the presidency. There's going to be very motivated Democrats, especially in a state like Washington, heading to the ballot. This might not be your most favorable year to be on the ballot. Plus, time is short. You got to get a lot of signatures and not a very short window here. So pushing that off, in many ways probably makes sense. See what happens with the courts. But the presumption or assumption that we can sort of maybe use the capital gains tax example as a bellwether for how this court might act, it's a completely new court. And many of these justices are going to be on the ballot this fall too, which is, and we're going to have contested races. So we don't even know what the makeup of the court is going to be come January.
Yeah. I should say that the group that's going to challenge this in the constitutionality of it in court is called Citizen Action Defense Fund. They are saying they're planning on filing maybe later this week. Former Attorney General for our state and gubernatorial candidate Rob McKenna has signed on to be part of that legal team and says he'll talk to us as soon as that lawsuit gets filed. So we'll be watching that. I was interested, Austin, I'm going to shout out Jim Bruner's coverage in the Seattle Times for this, that at the bill signing, Governor Ferguson, behind him, had supporters holding up signs about the millionaire's tax. So that was on Monday. And the sign said, "Win for kids, win for tax fairness." And there was apparently a moment where a political coordinator was like choreographing the crowd to like pull the signs up at the certain point so that they could be on camera. I mean, this is something that Democrats are certainly expecting to be fighting at the ballot box, to be convincing voters that this is this like long awaited rebalancing of what they call a very regressive tax system. And they think it's a long time coming, right, Austin?
a long time coming. It was I mean, it was a hard won fight. Just if you think about the 24-hour plus debate in the House, um, they have a lot to celebrate at this point. They've wanted this. Their progressive supporters have wanted this for a long time. They were clearly relishing and enjoying and savoring the moment, knowing that the fight is not over. But I also think that it's important to put this in some national context that efforts in blue states, Democratic-led states, to tax wealthier residents is trending around the country. My colleague at Pluribus News, Sophie Quinton, has been covering this. Connecticut, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, all proposed raising taxes on households earning more than $1 million. There are also ballot measures pending, potential ballot measures in California, Colorado, and Michigan. And a lot of this, I think, is driven by a backlash, a blue state backlash to Trump administration and congressional policies, cuts HR1, cuts to healthcare, the making permanent tax cuts for wealthier Americans. That has also energized this movement, both in Washington and in other states.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we certainly heard Governor Ferguson mentioning the big, beautiful bill, cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, things like that at this bill signing afterwards. Well, we're going to leave it here. We're watching for that potential lawsuit to be filed this week. We've got another couple days. And, of course, the ongoing question about the referendum. We should say we did hear from the Secretary of State's office directly that they are not going to be processing that referendum that Brian Haywood was attempting to file. So that fight also continues. Story number 2 on the front page.
I'm confident I'm not the only Washingtonian who often sees something on my phone and wonder to myself, exactly, is that AI or is it real? And I feel like I'm a reasonably discerning person, and it is virtually impossible these days.
Virtually impossible to tell AI from real. That's Governor Ferguson speaking at a bill signing last week. He put a signature on 2 new laws that would regulate AI, both misinformation, deepfakes, image generation, and how chatbots relate to people in our state. Our colleague at KUOW, Monica Nicholsberg, covered this. The first law, Austin, it kind of focuses on the content of modified images and requiring there to be traceable watermarks or metadata on those. And it applies to the large AI companies, more than 1 million monthly subscribers. The other one, very interestingly, has a component about how chatbots are able to interact with people. So they carve out things for customer service, but these are for when humans are having a conversation with a chatbot. Every 3 hours for adults, it has to have a reminder that this is not a human. For kids, it's much tighter, the regulations here. Every hour, there has to be a disclosure that the tool is not human. It forbids AI companions from having any kind of sexually explicit conversation with minors, a lot of other details in this bill. I mean, what do you think about Washington making this move? The governor apparently asked for this. The legislature complied to rein in AI and how people interact with it in our state.
But this was a governor's request bill, and that probably helped it get across the finish line because, historically, Washington State, even though and maybe because we are a very tech-centric state, economically and business-wise, we have not been in the vanguard of tech regulation, which may come as a surprise. I mean, we still don't have a statewide comprehensive consumer data privacy law. We do on healthcare data, but not on data generally that's collected from consumers. By the way, the bill that was considered here in Washington became a template for other states, but we don't have that. Also, this year, there was a social media addictive feeds bill that the Attorney General requested for the second year in a row that did not pass. And obviously, social media is now old tech, but legislators did rally around the idea of regulating chatbots, which is the topic du jour around the country right now when it comes to AI regulation. 100 plus bills in 30 plus states, according to one tracker that I was looking at. And this has really been motivated by kind of ripped from the headlines tragedies of young people becoming enmeshed and maybe addicted to these chatbots and then taking their own lives, harming themselves. It's young people and adults, but there have been lawsuits. And so alarm from the adults saying, "What we've got to do something." And what I've heard from a lot of lawmakers is they feel like they were late to the game on social media regulation, and so they want to move more quickly here. This, of course, all happening in the context also of the Trump administration pushing back on state regulations, threatening to withhold federal funding if they do regulate. That has not slowed chatbot regulation train.
Yeah. Interesting element, especially with the bill related to minors and chatbots. The chatbots will not be allowed to use manipulative engagement techniques. So trying to guilt somebody or emotionally, pretend like the chatbot is sad that they're leaving the conversation. And, that kind of addictive stuff that's baked in is something that's been the subject of these high-profile lawsuits and the decision recently, like for, against Meta on the addictiveness of its platforms. But as you say, it seems like the social media regulation has lagged far behind. Really interesting to kind of loop in the, hesitation and maybe more deliberative process for regulating phones in classrooms, for example, in Washington, versus really seeming to get out in front on AI chatbots. I want to move on to our next story just because we're low on time, and this is a really big one, and it has to do with voting.
And so we're going to be signing an executive order. It's, I believe it's foolproof, and maybe it'll be tested, maybe it won't. I think it's very obvious what's said.
So that is President Trump in the Oval Office Tuesday. He signed a new executive order seeking to create lists of eligible U.S. citizen voters in each state. And he also instructed the Postal Service to only send mail-in ballots to those eligible voters on the list. He says it's foolproof. This is going to get challenged in court. Other things that Trump has tried to do with voting by EO have been blocked. Austin, I know that we are at war. Gas prices are super sky high. There are a million things to pay attention to right now. But this is a really pivotal election coming up in the fall. What are you paying attention to when it comes to all the stuff around voting right now?
Well, there's 8 states that are all vote by mail. We are obviously one of them. They are mostly blue states. Utah stands out as the outlier there. But we know that the president has been going after vote by mail for years now. There is sort of a stress test that is happening to our election system in this country. He's pushing on Congress to pass laws, voter ID laws. That's not happened. And the executive order has been his sort of default. If I can't do it through Congress, then I'll just do it by executive order. And to your point, he's being challenged in court. He'll be challenged on this one. Attorney General Nick Brown put out a statement just a short while ago saying the law is on our side. There's nothing to support the president's vote fraud claims. And he said, we're once again prepared to defend Washingtonians' rights. So, and we're seeing statements like that from Democratic attorneys general and governors, for that matter, across the country. So this will be challenged. They're confident they'll get it blocked. But it speaks to this broader, ongoing, since the 2020 election, stress test that's going on, and the trust around elections, the trust around vote by mail, and something that we're so used to right now, but it's almost like somebody's trying to put the genie back in the box, back in the bottle.
And it does seem like he's getting frustrated that Congress is not getting the SAVE Act passed that he's been trying to jam through the Senate. They don't have the 60 votes. Senate Majority Leader John Thune does not want to nuke the filibuster for that. And so he's trying to go around it. But again, executive orders have been slapped down before. We'll see what happens with this one in the court. Our final story for Front Page today takes us a little bit, a few years back in history.
10, 9, 8, 7, ignition sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition, 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff. We have a liftoff, and it's lighting up the area. It's just like daylight here at Kennedy Space Center as the Saturn V is moving off the pad.
Okay, more than 50 years after that launch of Apollo 17 in 1972, NASA is scheduled to go back to the moon today. Astronauts with Artemis II are going to slingshot around the moon. It's a 10-day journey. The launch is scheduled for the 3 o'clock hour, 3:24 p.m. Pacific time in Florida. Artemis, by the way, Austin, is the twin sister of Apollo. So that's the connection there with the Apollo mission I hadn't made prior to this. Yeah. So NASA is gearing up to eventually build a permanent base on the moon. They want to launch future missions to Mars. Lots of Washington companies are part of this Artemis mission. Boeing built a lot of the rockets, the Space Launch System. Of course, it's recovering from a pretty bad stumble with the Starliner. Are you a space nerd, Austin? Are you excited about this new
I'm not a
launch?
space nerd. I am, though, very appreciative of the sort of historic moment this is. These launches make me nervous, to be honest with you.
Yes, me too.
I can't help but wonder what the astronauts are thinking as they're, getting strapped in. I mean, I don't relax until my plane takes off the ground, and that's, I've flown a lot and I still get nervous. So I just imagine, what is in their minds. And then the fact that Washington State has such a piece of this, Senator Cantwell said 41 Washington companies have a role and a piece in this. The stakes are high. It's been 50 years since we've done something, I guess, similar. And it's also our 250th anniversary as a country. So, there's a lot of symbolism here. And I want a safe launch. I want a safe launch.
I went to see Project Hail Mary last night at the local AMC, and I can't even watch a space movie like that where it's all fictional and there's aliens in it. I mean, I get so nervous about space things, but it is really cool. There's a company out of Redmond that Cantwell highlighted that did the thrusters and has done thrusters for NASA since 1968. L3 Harris, also Carmen Space and Defense in Mukilteo produced propellant-driven hatch release mechanisms for the capsule on Artemis. Just really cool how much of a piece of this history that our region has. Well, speaking of a piece of history, boy, this is a nice visit that you've made here. Austin Jenkins, really appreciate, it feels like old times having you back on the radio for Front Page. You cover tech policy in the States for Pluribus News now. Thank you. I hope you had a great time. I really enjoyed having you on.
It was great to be here. I'm glad that Ginger behaved herself. And let's do it again.
Yes, absolutely. Ginger and yourself are welcome back anytime. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.